Welcome, everyone. Hope you are enjoying day two of Learnovation so far. My name's Ilse White, and I'll be sharing some of the details on my research on well-being with you today, swiftly followed by Janet Benson. And Janet, do you want to do a quick introduction before you leave us for a little while?
Yeah, no, just to say that I will be kind of following on from what you're saying in relation to well-being and very much looking at how collaboration can really foster that kind of well-being in our learners and employees, especially in the current sort of remote and hybrid working situation. So thank you, Ilse. Looking forward to your part.
Good. And I have to say, we were delighted to hear people talk about the importance of well-being and collaboration in the context of the future of work yesterday as well. And we couldn't agree more. And I just wanted to remind everyone that please feel free to enter any questions or comments that you have in the chat as we go through this. We love a good discussion in Learnovate, and we love you to be part of that as well. So with that, I will share a brief agenda of the topics we will cover today. I'll start off with why well-being is an area of focus for Learnovate and share some of the key takeaways from our research to date. And then Janet will walk you through some of her insights on the importance of online collaboration and how you set yourself up for success and how organizations can facilitate online collaboration. So quite a lot to cover, but we hope it'll be interesting. So let's dive straight in. And I'll start off with a bit of background around the case of why we need to improve our well-being. And it links in, there's a lot of parallels to what Pam was talking about, which was a great presentation there, Pam. So, but in terms of well-being, the topic has been getting a lot of attention, and it's really no wonder because even before the pandemic, we've seen that levels of well-being have consistently decreased over for the past 4 or 5 decades, maybe even longer. Stress and burnout were already widespread before the pandemic, but the pandemic has accelerated that effect, and people are now reporting the lowest levels of well-being and engagement ever. And that's having a huge impact on our lives, right? We know that people with good well-being levels are more likely to flourish in life and in work and are more engaged and productive. And if that's really hard to achieve or if that's a challenge, then that's a problem for everyone. So the trend that we're seeing is that good well-being will increasingly become a competitive advantage for organizations, and we can already see that a lot of those changes um, happening in work and education with the return to work and education and the world really collectively discovering what the new normal is going to look like. And there is an increased awareness that well-being will play an important role in managing those changes that we're facing in life and education and work. And organizations are beginning to realize that well-being is going to give them a growing competitive advantage, and any solutions that are implemented in that area can no longer be seen as a nice to have or a one-off or an add-on. And the conversation's really shifting to where we start a discussion on how we can design well-being into our lives and for us all to live meaningful and happy lives. Zooming in to the context of Learnovate again, as you can see, well-being and learning in the context of the future of work is an integral part of Learnovate's evolving research agenda. Johnny was talking to that before. And the reason why that is because of that significant growth on the topic in recent years. And we're also hearing more about it from our industry members and thought leaders, particularly over the past year and a half. And through our research work, the challenge is to investigate how well-being can be fostered and how we can understand the impacts that it has on the employee and their learning in particular. So, and that's why this is what our research well-being path has looked like to date. So we started approaching it in the broadest sense and completed a research report to get a solid understanding of some of the key theories that are at play in the area and how well-being is defined. And that was then followed by a deeper dive into what might be described as the science of well-being, to get a better understanding of how bad or good well-being manifests itself in different settings and what strategies we can apply as individuals and organizations to ensure that good well-being. Um, and knowing more about that, and just a note to say that we have absolutely not exhausted the research on well-being, nor are we close to it. We're now very interested in narrowing our focus and develop an understanding of how we can cleverly use learning to improve well-being and learner well-being. So to really take a deep dive into understanding what people need to live meaningful lives and how learning can be a contributing factor in achieving that. So next, and before I discuss the topic of well-being in the context of the future of work, I wanted to share some of the key takeaways from our research, so that you as well get that baseline understanding of what's at play here. We've uncovered some really interesting insights, I think, and I'm keen to share that with you today. The first key takeaway is that when it comes to defining well-being, it's really about viewing it as a matter of balance between our resources on the one hand and our challenges on the other hand. And those can be psychological, social, and physical. And that probably makes a lot of sense. Yeah, balance is fine. We all hold a lot of plates in the air. We go balance them all, but we all know that gaining and maintaining that balance is not as easy in reality. If it were, we would be much better at it. But the reality is that it's difficult and it requires a lot of hard work and a lot of ongoing work that never stops, really. But thankfully, as humans are made of strong stuff, and we do have the means to improve our well-being. So we can invest and maintain that well-being by improving our resilience. And resilience is generally considered to be the antidote to stress and burnout, which are kind of the manifestations of bad well-being, if you like. And it's the resilience is the elasticity that we need to bounce back and regain our balance at all the time. And Pam was talking about that, like we need that resilience when we deal with change and all the change that comes at us, for example. And the good news is that we can improve that resilience by learning new skills and by developing and practicing good habits. And the better we are at this, the more likely we are to have good well-being, be happy, and flourish. So that's easy, right? If only it was that way, because our brains, and this is the neuroscience bit of it, and I'm going to try and explain it. It's very interesting. It's very scratching the surface on this, but our brains throw a spanner in the work in achieving good well-being, because when it comes down to deciding what resources we need to invest in, we're actually not as great as humans to make the right decisions around that. So we know what is good for us, or we think we know, but we don't necessarily act on it, and it makes and as a result we make a bit of a mess of our well-being. The reason for this, as it turns out, is that our brain is hardwired to want the wrong things to make us happy, and that's referred to as miswanting. So to illustrate that, like we're very focused on obtaining the cool things that will make us happy. So as the perfect house, a great job, or a good salary, good grades, access to prestigious education, and even things like finding true love. We have been very successful in putting like socioeconomic systems around us that enforce those perceptions of what makes us happy over the years. But over the years, our happiness isn't increasing. So what's wrong? So the truth of that is that our brains make us overestimate the happiness that we will achieve from all of the wrong things. And this is a statement from Laurie Santos, who is a well-known psychologist at Yale, and she refers to this as the annoying features of the brain. For example, we spend a lot of time comparing ourselves with others and the perceived well-being of others. Obviously, what others have, others are happier than we are. Um, our brain also makes us get used to things, which is called hedonic adaptation. So we don't get the same happiness of the same things after a while. You know, you can buy a new car and be very happy, but that wears off after a while, and we settle for that base level of happiness. And most importantly, our brains also make us forget, by wanting the wrong things, that we're naturally resilient to deal and face any of the challenges that negatively impact our happiness. So what we should want instead is better wanting. And this is sort of the part of this talk where it makes me feel a little bit of a hypocrite and the mum finger goes out, because we have to invest more time and resources in social connections, for example, because sharing with others makes us happier. And we need to focus on our signature strengths, because again, we're at our happiest when we do the things that we love and that we're good at, and when we develop new skills. um, Practicing to focus our minds is another kind of a habit or skill that we need to develop to stop our mind from wandering. Apparently, our minds wander 50% of the time. So we need to try and become more efficient and effective in achieving our goals by stopping our minds to wander. And we should invest in more experiences rather than things. So, yes, that donut makes you really, really happy, but only for a short while. And a holiday or a meal with friends, on the other hand, will have a much longer lasting effect on our happiness. And finally, we need to do the obvious things of optimizing our health. So, enough sleep, a good diet, and enough exercise. And it all sounds so simple, but all the while, our brain is actively working against us and winning a lot of the time, because it's easier to not activate the parts of our brain that can say, well, hold on a sec, I am going to choose and practice what's actually good for me. That takes a lot more mental effort and it requires practice. But we do have it in us to take control of our well being. It is a matter of developing the right skills and developing the right habits. And that's where learning comes into it. Um, these are the 26 skills that have been identified through research in positive psychology that have been proven to have a long lasting and positive effect of our well being. And if we developed and practiced them, we would increase our resilience and by proxy improve our well being and our happiness. And I won't go through these in detail, but all of these underlying cognitive skills for resilience and well being can be learned and developed and also measured, which is very important. And then again, the more resilient we are, the more we are able to balance our challenges and resources, and the easier it is to get that good well being and perform to the best of our abilities. And what I love about this is that building these skills can help prevent stress and bad well-being rather than curing it. And that's the whole idea of positive psychology, is that it's built on that concept of prevention rather than curing, which has been a massive shift in the field of psychology and mental health around 20-25 years ago. um, a very important thing to remember, and that's takeaway 5, is that well-being is a dynamic construct with many components that all impact on each other. So we have our resources that help us maintain balance within our work-life system, and that determines how we spend our time and manage our energy and mitigate our stress. But crossover and spillover of these resources between work and life and our communities happen all the time, and they can either have a positive effect or a negative effect on our well-being. And to manage our work-life systems, we aim to mitigate the negative impacts and maximize the positive impacts, right? Um, and to do that, our work-life systems need structure and regulation to achieve that better well-being. And to achieve that regulation, in turn, we need boundaries and interfaces between our work, our life, our communities. And the caveat here is that finding that successful work-life balance is not just up to us. It's not just up to the individual. It's a negotiation. It's a collaboration. Everybody has to negotiate within a work structure, within a family, or within a community, to decide to what extent the different parts of our lives are either segmented, integrated, or anything in between. And the key to that negotiating dimension, and working out a strategy that best suits the individual and the work-life systems with a best interest with the best interest for all concerned in mind. Um, and this emphasizes that well-being through a good life work-life balance isn't just up to the individual. It's a shared responsibility between us and the organizations we work in and the communities that make up our system. And that brings me to the work into the work realm, and the last research takeaway that I'm sharing with you today, and that's that achieving a culture of well-being, which is increasingly what organizations are aiming to achieve, is again a shared responsibility, and then on one that requires a holistic strategy and a realization that good well-being is important to the success of any organization. And the Lloyd study that we referenced in our research suggests that about 80% of organizations recognize that workplace well-being is important for the company's performance over the next years, but only 12% feel that they actually have what it takes to address that challenge. So that suggests that maybe, yes, the awareness is there, but there's a lot of work to do still. I also came across this equation on the screen here that I think represents the right formula for a successful well-being strategy. And all the variables in here are interdependent, and the responsibility for each again is shared by both the individual and the organization. It starts with leadership. It needs to make organization well-being a priority and support and role model all of the activities associated with it. And the environment variable refers then to the notion that well-being is dynamic, a dynamic construct that's made up of many, many facets, like psychological, physical, social, and financial. Again, all the plates we're trying to hold up, and all of these are important, and none can be addressed with a one-off activity, which brings us back to it having to be integrated in work. And the last variable then is resilience, which really means our intentional practices and activities that strengthen our capability to bounce back. And when all of these variables are the same, optimal well-being is achieved. Again, very easy. It's a formula. It's a model. Of course, there's a lot more to it than just ticking the boxes on all of these. Um, so that was a whistle stop tour of what the research and the science say about well-being, and I'll walk you through a little bit now how that's connected to our work in Learnovate. And this illustration shows the most commonly referred to transversal skills that will become increasingly important as we head into the future of education and work. And as you can see, learning to learn and continuous learning, as well as developing skills for improved resilience, i.e., better well-being, are widely regarded as some of the core skills to function and adapt to the changes that will be thrust upon us and allow us to be successful in the future of work. And when we look at the relationship between learning and well-being, then we can look at that from two angles. So the first angle is the activity of learning itself. Learning to learn and lifelong learning has in itself the potential to improve our well-being. And then the second angle, sorry, is the relationship between learning and well-being, and that we can learn better well-being. We can develop the grace and the perseverance to maintain our well-being in the face of all this unprecedented change in our worlds. And as I mentioned before, our levels of happiness and well-being are for a large part within our control, but are also a shared responsibility of all the other partners in our education, our work, and our life systems. So it's a super interesting challenge for us in Learnovate to understand how learning can improve well-being and how well-being can be learned. And our research has thrown up a plethora of ideas and approaches that we could explore. And we're currently putting together a research working group with our industry members to work towards a solution in this area. So, in summary, what we know is that well-being, or the skills to achieve good well-being, can be learned and practiced and developed, and that learning itself contributes to good well-being. And the question that we would like to explore further is how we can cleverly use and apply learning to engage and motivate people, workers or learners, to understand, practice, and develop the skills that are needed to improve our well-being, whether that's in education and work, in our communities, or in our social settings. What we do know is that no man's an island, and that collaboration is going to be key in learning and developing better well-being, which brings me to the point where I thank you for your time listening to me this afternoon, and I hand you over to Janet, who will share some of the key insights on the relationships between learning, collaboration, and the future of work. So thank you, and Janet, over to you.
Thank you so much, Ilse. That was brilliant. And actually, you reminded me there as you were talking about some of the wellbeing collaboration stuff. I'm doing this fantastic course with the RCSI at the moment on positive health. And we had a great talk from Beth Freites, who a lot of people, I think, will recognize as being a thought leader in the space of, lifestyle change and positive health. And she was talking about how in the last 18 months, she's been looking at how collaborative tasks have really helped people with their well-being and and their mental health. So for example, people coming together to make masks and that kind of thing. So doing really collaborative type tasks. So hopefully what I'm going to talk about now will tie in a little bit with what you just spoke about. So I want to talk about a little bit of why we do online collaboration for learning. And as a starting point, I just wanted to mention this. Really, this was a quip that I made at a conference that I was at a couple of years ago, that was kind of looking at collaboration. And I said, I think communication is sort of like it's like a line where collaboration is a web, and it just means that I think, collaboration has so many moving parts, has so many different interactions, different types of activities, lots of people interacting with each other. And the management of collaboration and collaborative tasks online can be a lot more difficult than just managing, what people see as just kind of communication. So I thought that was a nice place to start. So I just want to talk about why why collaboration for learning. And a lot of people who are here will understand, the theory behind why we encourage collaboration in the learning space. And the key one really to start with it is that it is really a key factor in active learning. We do not want our learners to be passively, engaging with tutors or with their lecturers or with their teachers and just passively just consuming information. We want them to be active learners in their own learning experience, which is such a good, an important part of active learning, and to create those deeper learning experiences. And other speakers actually at our event over yesterday and today have been talking about building that community of learners, which is such a big part of, working together as a group to kind of, work towards a common goal, and that goal is often towards learning. So again, I've mentioned there that community of practice theory, where learners collaborating online will give them the real opportunities to interact and connect and build relationships, which is such an important part of the remote learning experience, particularly as we're seeing in the last 18 months, where people are starting to work remotely and in a hybrid way. So building that community is vital when we have sort of an online learning experience. And collaboration for learning also helps to engage our learners through, interaction, discussion, any kind of activities. And again, that's something we've seen from the research and from talking to people in the last 18 months around their learning experiences. We've seen disengagement as being a real issue, and people not engaged, they're not really feeling motivated to learn, never mind to work. So that's something that we need to look at and see, how do we provide better learning experiences so that we continue to engage our learners, particularly in the online space. And to tie in with all of that, and what Ilse really spoke to there, in her part of our discussion, it's around helping with learner isolation. So very much when we have learners who are working remotely, who are learners who are learning in the online space. I myself did my master's fully online. Having really authentic collaborative tasks for your learners really helps with that learner isolation issue, where people feel like they're completely on their own. And again, it helps with that learner motivation. So anything we can do to help learners feel less isolated and more part of, whether that be the institution, their university, or their organization, and feel part of the culture of their organization, that's obviously going to help. And collaboration can definitely help with that. Um, so to look at, I suppose, initial starting points, and these might seem sort of straightforward and common sense, but I think sometimes we forget the basics when we look at setting up collaboration, especially authentic collaboration that we want our learners to get involved with. And it kind of resonated with me a little bit what Pam said about community contribution. And I think part of it is making sure that people are set up for success, and they know what's expected from the collaborative process, from their perspective, what they're expected to contribute, and then what they're expected to get from the experience. So I think one of the key points that we can start with is, that we can't assume anything. And I think that's something that organizations and institutions struggled with a little bit in the last 18 months, for example, where we assume that, and particularly younger learners, that they can engage with the online space. I don't particularly like the term digital natives, but I think when we look at, that we assume that because our learners can use social media, they can, they go online to use Netflix, for example, that they can engage with learning experiences online, or any of the tools and technologies or learning management systems that we have. And we can't assume that at all. And in order to kind of set our learners up for success, we have to make sure that they feel confident in their abilities to engage, even just with the technology, or getting a basic understanding of what is expected from them. So setting expectations is such an important part of setting up not only collaborative tasks, but any kind of online or remote learning experience. And kind of to resonate what Pam said too, around setting expectations, goals, objectives. I know some of the speakers yesterday spoke about that too. It's very important to make sure that everyone is aware of what's expected of them, and at certain times as well. So to make sure that everyone knows, what's the plan for this kind of activity, what is expected from me, and what am I expected to get out of it. So again, it's that what's in it for me that I think is very important in the corporate learning space in particular. And again, we have to promote positive and open, and a positive and open communication, because if there's any kind of negative connotations to an online learning or collaborative experience, people are going to switch off from that. And we want to make sure that upfront that everything is very positive, and that we're, providing opportunities to provide that kind of reinforcing and corrective feedback in the right ways. Again, welcoming learners to synchronous sessions is so important. We've all had the experience in the last, and I keep saying 18 months, but I mean, I've been working from home for a while myself. So it's nice to kind of, not to forget those things about, I see somebody there, hi, how are you? Do you know, how are things with you? Those really basic things to make those kind of connections with people up front. And so people feel like they're part of the experience, but also it comes back to when we're looking at, and particularly in Learnovate at the moment, we're engaged in a large research project at the moment around remote onboarding. And a big part of that is providing that experience to new recruits around making them feel welcome and part of the company culture. And it's something that's not really necessarily naturally occurring at the moment when we're in the online space. If you're in a physical environment, it seems to come more naturally and it's more fluid. But I think when we're in a remote situation, we have to make the time and effort to kind of, engage people and to kind of welcome them to the situations. And a nice one I just thought when I was doing some research on this, using real world everyday problems is very important in relation to especially learner motivation. And I know my colleague Peter Gillis spoke about this yesterday, but it's very important to kind of look at, what are the real world problems, what are things that are relevant to the learner. So relevance being a really important part of ensuring that learners feel connected to their learning experience. And one example that I actually quite liked when I was looking at this was considering to, giving an example of how collaborative approaches have worked in the past. So the double helix structure of DNA, as an example, I thought was a nice one because, if these four particular people hadn't come together at this particular time and collaborated, would they have found the double helix structure of DNA then? What would have happened if this collaboration didn't exist? And where would we be now? And I'm not saying that it wouldn't have been discovered, but maybe, it would have been a completely different situation. So it's really nice to see how collaboration has worked in the past and provide your learners with examples of that, because it sets the scene for the importance of collaboration and why we're doing it. So again, I want to go through some kind of basic, I guess, top tips really around facilitating online collaboration. And there are things that we can do to make sure that learners in particular feel that this is a worthwhile exercise from their perspective. And again, I keep saying that what's in it for me, but I think it's very important when we're engaging learners online that we maximize the use of their online time, and we make sure that they're aware that there's a reason why we're carrying out these kinds of activities, and that they understand what the takeaways are from the learning experience. So I think focusing on tasks that promote, problem solving and critical thinking are very important, because again, we want to make sure that the tasks that our learners are doing in a collaborative way are tasks that are suited to collaboration. So again, it's not about, can everyone get on a Zoom call and we'll talk through a document? Can we think about what it is that we really want to get from a collaborative experience and make sure that the kind of tasks that we choose for that are kind of suited to it, and also that the tools and technologies that we use are going to be suited to that too. And I know we'll discuss that a little bit at our panel discussion after this. Um, Considering, separating learners into smaller groups and then coming back together really helps, especially with learners who maybe don't work in a larger group setting, might be a bit shy or happier, sort of sharing information with smaller groups. And we know that a lot of the technology out there at the moment has the functionality around breakout rooms, for example, can be really useful for this kind of thing, or getting people into their own little WhatsApp groups or whatever. And I'll talk a little bit very briefly about the technology after this. Um, so again, rotating groups is kind of an important one too, that you're not stuck with the same people all the time. This is something, again, like we can even apply to the school space, so that we're kind of mixing people up, getting students talking to different students, and getting people involved with each other and getting to know each other. And again, when I talk about remote onboarding as one of our projects, it's another way of, kind of getting a new recruit to understand who their network is and getting to talk to people in their organization with a purpose. So again, it's not setting up a discussion for a discussion's sake, that there's an actual purpose for people to come together and interact and collaborate. And assigning roles is an important one, because we know from the online space, there's that concept of the lurker, where people will sit back and sort of not get involved if they don't have a role assigned to them. So in these collaborative type tasks, it's very important to assign people, whether that be note taker, the leader of the group, whatever it might be, so that everyone feels they have a part to play in this collaboration, because otherwise we will lose some of the quieter people, but also it'll, as we know from people's personalities, the kind of louder people will tend to take over that kind of whole situation. So we want it to be successful. So again, assigning roles to people, and even roles that they kind of feel mightn't suit them, sometimes works really well, just to get people out of their comfort zone and kind of looking at something in a different way. And I think with really effective remote collaboration, or any collaboration, as people who are facilitating this situation, I think what we need to do is start as being that facilitator and making sure people know what they're doing and making sure people are comfortable. But as these kind of tasks progress, it's important for our learners to kind of feel like they're taking control of their own learning experience, right? So they're feeling a lot more autonomous. So as a facilitator, you should then move to more of a moderator role, and then even to observer. So where the learners are really interacting with each other, collaborating, and doing things themselves. They don't really need you anymore, but you can be there just to help out where needs be. And I think that's a really good example of when a collaboration really works, that you can move to that observer role. So again, variety is the spice of life. People are probably wondering why there's a pepper there. So varying the types of challenges again is really, it's not that and I think we do this sometimes in L&D. We find something that works and we try to shoehorn it into everything. And I think it's good to keep challenging ourselves and challenging our learners, and providing them with lots of different types of learning experiences. So, you can do things like group challenges, I've said there, collaborative writing, and all the tools can support that. So I'll just talk briefly, because I have 1 minute left, to talk briefly about the tools that kind of help with facilitating collaboration. And as I said, breakout rooms as part of Zoom, MS Teams, and these great organizations have those breakout rooms, as well as whiteboarding, which is really useful. And we would use that at Learnovate when we're doing a little bit of brainstorming, maybe on a Zoom call, for example. The learning management system that you have probably has discussion boards and forum features. So look to see how much you can kind of facilitate through the learning management system that you already have. And does it have collaborative type functions or functionality or features that you can use? So again, I think what we always need to do is look at what we already have, rather than trying to bring in a new tool or technology. And we always start with the problem first, and then see how the solution can fit to it. Something that we use a lot in Learnovate is Slack, and we use that a lot for some of our informal or more social kind of interactions, but also for sort of chatting about particular projects, and making sure that we're all on track with things. So it's a really useful tool. But then WhatsApp can also be used for the same purpose, and you can create your groups and stuff like that. I think e-portfolios and online blogs are really useful for collaborating, in that they provide opportunities for reflection for learners, but also opportunities for learners to give each other peer feedback, which I think is a really important part of that learning experience, and especially that collaboration. And again, document sharing, any of the Google kind of Docs or any of those, that document sharing can be really useful for both synchronous, so when everyone's together doing something together, or asynchronous, so when people are offline, that we can work on similar documents. And wikis are kind of useful for that, obviously Wikipedia being the most famous one, but wikis are really useful for that. And again, what we use in Learnovate a lot, and especially as part of our innovation services team, we use the tool Miro. We did look at Mural as well, but Miro was kind of the better one that worked for what we needed. And it's fantastic for workshopping, for us brainstorming, for us being able to kind of come together in a meeting and having something visual when we come out of that kind of collaborative session. So again, there's tons of tools out there, and I think these are only going to get better as we kind of need to move more into that collaborative space. And on that note, Louise is telling me I'm finished. So I think I'm a minute over, but I just wanted to say thank you for coming along and listening to myself and Ilse, and I'm looking forward to the panel discussion.